I arrived at the beach on the evening of March 14th, seeking solace from a week that had been anything but kind. The sand was cool beneath my feet as I set up my tent, the sound of waves crashing rhythmically against the shore providing a soothing backdrop. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. The air was still, almost too quiet, as if the beach itself was holding its breath. That first night, I was awakened by the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the sand outside my tent. My heart pounded as I listened intently, straining to hear more. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was circling my tent. I held my breath, waiting for the sound to fade, but it didn't. Instead, it grew closer, the soft crunch of sand underfoot becoming unnervingly clear. I felt a chill run down my spine. I finally mustered the courage to unzip the tent and peer outside, expecting to see someone standing there. But the beach was empty. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. The footprints I expected to find in the sand were absent, as if the visitor had vanished into thin air. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the isolation and darkness. The next morning, as the sun cast long shadows across the beach, I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling from the night before. I walked along the shore, letting the cool water lap at my feet, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. But then I saw them, footprints, leading from my tent to the water's edge. They weren't mine. They were too large, and they abruptly disappeared where the waves met the sand. Later that day, as I sat on a driftwood log, staring out at the endless ocean, I caught a glimpse of something, or someone, out of the corner of my eye. A shadowy figure, standing just beyond my line of sight. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. My heart raced as I scanned the beach, finding only emptiness. The feeling of being watched, however, lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. As the sun began to set on the second day, a sense of unease settled over me. The beach, which had felt so peaceful and inviting at first, now seemed ominous. The rhythmic crash of the waves no longer soothed me. Instead, it felt like the ocean itself was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. My paranoia grew with each passing hour, fed by the memories of the previous night's strange occurrences. That night, I lay in my tent, wide awake, straining to hear any sound over the pounding of my own heart. Then, just as I feared, the footsteps returned. They were closer this time, almost as if they were right outside the thin walls of my tent. The steady crunch of sand underfoot was unmistakable, and my pulse quickened as I realized there was no way I could ignore it any longer. I had to confront whatever or whoever was out there. Summoning all my courage, I threw open the tent flap and stepped out into the night. The beach was bathed in silver moonlight, every detail sharply defined in the eerie glow. But again, there was no one there. The footsteps had stopped the moment I emerged, leaving only the sound of the waves and the wind. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, but I found nothing. The emptiness of the beach felt almost mocking. The next morning, as I walked along the shore, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Drawn in the sand near my tent were strange symbols, crudely carved into the ground. They looked ancient, almost tribal, and I had no idea what they meant. The sight of them filled me with dread, as if I had stumbled upon something that was not meant to be disturbed. I kicked at the sand, trying to erase the markings, but the uneasy feeling remained. All day, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. It was as if unseen eyes followed my every move, making it impossible to relax. The isolation that had once felt like a welcome escape now felt like a trap, closing in around me. I constantly looked over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was never anyone. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I knew I couldn't go on like this. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, a stray dog wandered into my campsite. It was a scruffy, thin creature with matted fur and weary eyes, but it approached me with a cautious friendliness. I welcomed the dog's company, grateful for the presence of another living being. The dog stayed close to me, as if sensing my unease, and I felt a small measure of comfort, knowing I wasn't entirely alone. The dog's behavior that night was strange. As the moon rose high above the ocean, casting a silver sheen across the waves, the dog began to growl softly, its gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the campfire. The growl was low, almost a rumble, as if it sensed something I couldn't see. I felt a chill creep over me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The dog's unease only heightened my own, making me hyper-aware of every sound, every movement around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dog knew more than I did, that it was somehow connected to the strange occurrences on the beach. As I sat by the fire, feeding it small pieces of my dinner, I noticed it kept glancing toward the shoreline, where the water met the sand. I followed its gaze, but there was nothing there, only the endless expanse of the ocean. Still, the dog's intense focus made me uneasy, as if something was lurking just out of sight. The next morning, I made a curious discovery. While exploring a part of the beach I hadn't yet visited, I stumbled upon an old, weathered journal half buried in the sand. The leather cover was cracked and faded, and the pages were yellowed with age. Flipping through it, I found entries written in a shaky hand, describing experiences eerily similar to my own. The writer mentioned hearing footsteps, seeing strange figures, and feeling a constant sense of being watched. The journal's final entries spoke of a watcher, a presence on the beach that seemed to follow the writer, but not with malicious intent. The watcher was described as protective, guiding the writer through moments of danger and fear. As I read these words, a strange sense of comfort washed over me. Could it be that the presence I had felt was not something to fear, but something that had been protecting me all along? That night, the dog stayed even closer to me, as if it too understood the significance of what I had read. The footsteps didn't return, and the strange symbols I had seen in the sand were gone. For the first time since I arrived, I felt a sense of peace. The tension in the air had lifted, replaced by a quiet calm. It was as if the watcher, whoever or whatever it was, had decided I was no longer in need of its protection. The next morning dawned with a sense of serenity I hadn't felt since arriving at the beach. The atmosphere was different, lighter, as if the very air had been cleansed of the tension that had haunted me for days. I watched the sunrise from the edge of the water, the waves lapping gently at my feet. The dog sat beside me, its eyes calm and its demeanor relaxed, a stark contrast to the unease of the previous nights. As the day progressed, I felt more at ease. The strange occurrences had ceased, and the oppressive feeling of being watched had lifted. The beach, once a source of fear and anxiety, now felt like a place of refuge and healing. I spent the day exploring the shoreline, collecting seashells, and enjoying the solitude that no longer felt threatening. The dog followed me everywhere, a constant and reassuring presence. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in weeks. The dog curled up beside me in the tent, its body warm against mine. There were no footsteps, no strange symbols in the sand, no whispers on the wind. The night was quiet, save for the gentle sound of the waves and the occasional rustling of the trees. For the first time, I felt truly safe, as if whatever had been watching over me had finally granted me its full protection. When I woke the next morning, the dog was gone. I searched the campsite, calling out, but there was no sign of it. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of gratitude. The dog had come into my life at the exact moment I needed it, guiding me through the darkness and fear. As I packed up my tent and prepared to leave, I felt a deep connection to the beach and the unseen presence that had watched over me. Just as I was about to leave, I found a single, perfect seashell lying where the dog had slept. It was unlike any of the others I had collected, smooth, iridescent, and glistening in the morning light. I picked it up and held it in my hand, feeling a warmth that radiated from within. It felt like a gift, a final sign of the watcher's approval, a reminder that I had been protected and guided through a time of fear and uncertainty. Leaving the beach, I felt a mixture of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a strange sense of loss. The experience had changed me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. As I drove away, I couldn't help but glance back at the shoreline, half expecting to see the dog watching me from a distance. But the beach was empty, peaceful, with no signs of the strange occurrences that had unsettled me during my stay. Back home, I kept the seashell on my desk, a constant reminder of the unseen companion that had watched over me. It wasn't just a souvenir, it was a symbol of the protection and guidance I had received, even when I didn't fully understand it. Whenever I felt anxious or overwhelmed, I would hold the shell in my hand, feeling the warmth and reassurance it brought. It was as if a part of the beach had stayed with me, offering comfort whenever I needed it. I shared my story with a few close friends, but most of them dismissed it as a result of isolation and an overactive imagination. They laughed it off, saying I had spent too much time alone. But I knew the truth. I knew that someone had been there, watching over me, guiding me through the darkness. The experience had left me with a sense of peace and a newfound belief in things beyond the ordinary. As the weeks passed, I found myself feeling more grounded and confident. The fear and anxiety that had plagued me before the trip seemed distant, as if they had been washed away by the ocean. The beach had given me more than just a break from the stresses of daily life. It had given me a sense of purpose and a deeper connection to the world around me. I felt more in tune with myself, more aware of the subtle signs and messages that life often offers. Even though I never returned to that beach, I carried its lessons with me. I knew I was never truly alone, that there was always a presence watching over me, guiding me when I needed it most. The experience had left me with a deep sense of gratitude and a belief in the unseen forces that shape our lives. The seashell remained on my desk, a constant reminder of the time I spent on that mysterious beach and the unseen companion who had kept me safe. It was October 8th, 2023, when I arrived at the beach campsite, seeking solitude after months of relentless work. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and decaying leaves. The beach was deserted, the sand cold beneath my feet as I set up my tent near the dunes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a heavy silence settled over the area, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the shore. That night, as I lay in my tent, I began to hear faint voices. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sounds grew more distinct, like echoes of conversations carried on the breeze. They seemed to come from the direction of the ocean, but when I stepped outside to investigate, there was nothing. Just the dark expanse of water stretching endlessly into the night. The voices faded as quickly as they had come, leaving me with an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. The following morning, I decided to explore the beach, hoping to shake off the strange encounter from the night before. As I walked along the shoreline, something caught my eye. A rusted lantern, half buried in the sand. It looked like it had been there for decades, weathered by time and the elements. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling an odd connection to the object. It was a relic of the past, a forgotten piece of history that had somehow survived. That evening, as the sky darkened, the voices returned, louder this time. They echoed across the water, rising and falling like the tide. I stood at the edge of the ocean, straining to make out the words, but they were garbled, distorted, as if coming from another time. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a sudden urge to walk into the water, to follow the voices to their source. But I resisted, my feet rooted to the sand. As I stared out at the ocean, something strange happened. In the reflection of the water, I saw a figure standing beside me, just on the edge of my vision. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly turned, but there was no one there. The beach was empty, just as it had been before. But the unease lingered, gnawing at my mind, making me question what I had seen, or thought I had seen. That night, sleep did not come easily. The voices from the ocean echoed in my dreams, distorting into a chorus of distant cries. I found myself wandering through an endless fog, the sounds growing louder with each step, pulling me deeper into a void. When I finally awoke, my heart was pounding, and I was drenched in sweat. The feeling of dread from the dream lingered, wrapping itself around me like a cold, damp blanket. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, I decided to light the old lantern I had found. It took some effort, but eventually, a weak flame flickered to life, casting long shadows across the sand. The light was dim, but it created an eerie atmosphere around the campsite, making everything seem just a little more surreal. The shadows seemed to dance and shift as if they had a life of their own. Later that day, I took a long walk down the beach, trying to clear my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, always just out of sight. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but the empty shoreline. Yet, the sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing hour. The beach, which had once seemed so serene, now felt like a place filled with secrets I was never meant to uncover. As the sun set, the ocean seemed to come alive with an unnatural energy. The tide moved with a strange urgency, pulling and pushing in a rhythm that didn't match the usual ebb and flow. I stood at the edge of the water, watching as the waves crashed more violently against the shore. It was as if the sea was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand its message. The echoes returned, louder and more insistent, filling the air with their strange, haunting tones. That night, the most unsettling thing happened. As I walked back to my tent, I noticed footprints in the sand, leading directly into the ocean. They were fresh, the edges still sharp, as if someone had just walked into the water. I crouched down to inspect them, a chill running through me as I realized something was very wrong. The footprints were identical to my own, down to the smallest detail. But there were no prints leading back, no sign of anyone emerging from the sea. It was as if the ocean had swallowed them whole. The discovery of the footprints left me deeply unsettled. I couldn't stop thinking about them as I made my way into the nearby town the next day. The town was small, almost forgotten by time, with old buildings that seemed to lean into the wind. The locals were friendly enough, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, a quiet tension that hung in the air. I asked around about the beach, hoping to learn more about its history, but the responses I received only added to my unease. One elderly man, who looked like he had seen more than a lifetime's worth of strange things, warned me in a hushed tone to stay away from the beach after dark. His eyes, though cloudy with age, were sharp with concern as he spoke. He told me stories of people who had vanished from that very shore, leaving nothing behind but a few belongings and a mystery that had never been solved. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I found myself questioning whether I should even return to the campsite, but curiosity got the better of me. That evening, I drove back to the beach, determined to uncover whatever secrets it held. As I walked along the sand, the echoes returned, more persistent than ever. They seemed to call my name, though distorted and twisted by the wind and waves. I quickened my pace, feeling a sense of urgency, as if time was running out. The beach seemed to stretch on forever, and the light was fading fast. I was almost ready to turn back when I saw it, a faint figure in the distance, standing motionless at the water's edge. My heart raced as I approached, the sound of the waves growing louder, almost deafening. The figure was ghostly, barely more than a silhouette in the twilight. As I got closer, I felt a strange mix of fear and familiarity, as if I had seen this figure before, though I couldn't place where or when. But just as I was within a few feet of the figure, it vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone, as if it had been nothing more than a mirage. The echoes fell silent, leaving only the sound of my own breath and the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring out at the empty ocean, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But no answers came, only the growing darkness and a deepening sense of mystery. I spent the rest of the night searching the beach, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. The figure's sudden disappearance left me with more questions than answers, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Every now and then, I thought I heard the faintest echo of a voice, but it was always just out of reach, teasing me with its elusiveness. The beach felt endless, stretching on and on as I searched for any clue that could explain what I had seen. By the time I finally stopped, I was exhausted, my body heavy with fatigue, but my mind was still racing. I stood at the water's edge, the cold waves lapping at my feet, and shouted into the darkness, demanding answers. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the ocean. Then, as if in response, The tide surged forward, sending a wave crashing over me, knocking me off balance. I scrambled to my feet, drenched and trembling, feeling as though the ocean itself was trying to tell me something. As I backed away from the water, I noticed something unusual. There, half hidden by the rising tide, was the entrance to a small cave I hadn't seen before. It was tucked away in a rocky outcrop, barely visible unless you were standing right in front of it. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, curiosity pulling me forward despite the growing fear in my chest. The cave was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of salt and decay. Inside, I found remnants of the past, old belongings, weathered and forgotten, scattered across the cave floor. There were photographs too, faded and worn, showing people who looked lost to time. As I sifted through them, a chill ran through me. The faces in the photos seemed familiar, though I couldn't place them. Then, among the photographs, I found something that made my heart stop. A picture of myself, taken years ago, long before I had ever set foot on this beach. The realization hit me like a cold wave. This place, this beach, was connected to me in ways I couldn't understand. The echoes, the figure, the strange occurrences, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle I was only just beginning to see. But the more I uncovered, the more questions I had. Who had taken that photo? And why was it here, in this forgotten cave, among the relics of those who had disappeared? I left the cave feeling more lost than ever, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on my mind. As I stepped back onto the beach, I felt the echoes return, this time louder, almost insistent. They were no longer just distant voices. They were calling me, pulling me toward something I couldn't see. I knew I was close to uncovering the truth, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. The final day on the beach dawned gray and overcast, the sun hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The echoes had become a constant presence, weaving in and out of my consciousness, their whispers growing clearer yet still indecipherable. It felt as though the entire beach was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to occur. As I stood at the water's edge, the voices seemed to converge, coalescing into a single, haunting call that resonated deep within me. To my astonishment, I realized the voice was my own, distorted yet unmistakable, calling my name with an urgency that sent shivers down my spine. The pull toward the ocean was stronger than ever, an almost magnetic force urging me to step into the cold embrace of the waves. I fought the compulsion, every rational part of my mind screaming in protest, but the desire for answers was overpowering. Just as I was about to take that fateful step, a fleeting moment of clarity washed over me. A thought pierced through the fog. Perhaps some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. Perhaps the answers I sought would come at too great a cost. With renewed determination, I turned away from the ocean, deciding that my safety and sanity were worth more than the allure of the unknown. As I began to pack up my campsite, a sense of unease settled over me. It felt as though the beach itself was displeased with my decision, the air growing colder, the whispers turning into a cacophony of disapproval. Suddenly, as I was about to leave, the ghostly figure appeared once more, this time closer than ever before. Its form was clearer now, almost tangible, yet its face remained obscured, shrouded in shadows that seemed to defy the pale light of day. It raised an arm, gesturing silently toward the ocean, beckoning me with a grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. I stood frozen, torn between the promise of revelation and the instinct to flee. Time seemed to stand still as I weighed my options, the world narrowing down to this singular, pivotal moment. The figure's outstretched hand held both promise and peril, a crossroads between the known and the unknowable. Taking a deep breath, I looked away from the figure and down at the old lantern still clutched in my hand. Its flame flickered weakly, mirroring the wavering resolve within me. I realized that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. With a heavy heart, I turned my back on the figure and the ocean, choosing the path of safety over the seductive allure of the mystery. As I walked away, the whispers gradually faded, replaced by the familiar sounds of the wind and waves. Yet, a lingering sense of unfinished business hung in the air, a question mark left at the end of an incomplete sentence. The beach remained as enigmatic as ever, its secret securely locked away, at least for now. The story concludes with me standing at the threshold between the known and the unknown, the lantern's flame extinguished, leaving me to contemplate the choices made and the mysteries left behind.